use WebEx.
All right. There we go. Cool. All right. I got the recording going. There we go. Let's present. Everyone see? We good?
Yeah, it's much bigger now. It's perfect.
All right, fantastic. So with no rhyme or no reason, we're going to talk about special extrication and special rescue because that tab apparently wanted to come up first. So you'd be surprised with the amount of things that actually go really wildly wrong, even in the city. All the technical rescues and stuff like that. There's a lot of construction that goes on, and when you have all this construction, there's a lot of heavy machinery. There's a lot of unstable walls, right? So, for example, would you be jumping down into this giant pit of doom to go dig this worker out? Hopefully not. This is, hold on, if you can actually probably see this guy right there at the light blue shirt. There's your EMS lieutenant. Might actually be a fire lieutenant because he's got the wrong color hat on. Right, so EMS is probably, here's you got PD over here in the top left corner. EMS is probably over here somewhere. I think that might be a cop also. He looks like a cop. Right, so yeah, these are kind of cool and exciting jobs, but these are also some of those jobs that we are not necessarily trained to do, right? Remember, you need to have special training in order to be doing a lot of these kind of specialty rescue things. I don't know if anyone remembers this. This was about 4 years ago in Queens. I actually know the two medics who were on it. One of them was my medic student. He was my medic student. He had been cleared to be a medic at that point at Jamaica. This was in Forest Park. There were some younger boys playing on the ice. One of them fell through. So one of the other boys went in and rescued him. And then he ended up drowning. And if you actually look, I don't know if you can, hold on, I think I have to doodle for you to see my, right there. Those are his arms. So they jumped in, the firefighters jumped in, like fully clothed, to go try to rescue that boy, and he actually ultimately died. But there's a lot of different specialty items or specialty technical rescue things that we can end up doing. Generally, for us, I want to say vehicle extrication is probably the number one thing that we end up doing, especially because people can't seem to know how to drive very well, especially after the pandemic. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but like after the lockdowns ended, all of a sudden people just could not remember how to drive. They were just crashing into stuff left, right, and center. Oh, that didn't work. So we tend to do a lot of extrications from vehicles. Water and ice, that tends to be considered a specialty rescue, right? Because you need to know how to swim, is usually pretty helpful. We let the I like to call them the beach EMS, like lifeguards, do water rescues. Ice rescues again. Trench collapse, confined spaces, right? So issues with confined spaces is you have low oxygen environments. So those low oxygen environments are very dangerous, not only to obviously the person who's trapped, but for for us as providers. So they have, at least in the city, they have the rescue medics who actually have like the breathing apparatus, so they could go into confined spaces and rescue people. Hazmat, right? EMS, FDNY has rescue and hazmat medics and EMTs. The general rule for hazardous materials is if you can't cover the scene with your thumb, you're too close. Wilderness search and rescue is another, like there's entire classes on how to do wilderness search and rescue. It's pretty cool. Also potentially pretty scary. A lot of these guys are up in elevation, and doing all sorts of wild things with helicopters. That personally, I don't trust helicopters. I trust helicopters about as much as I trust horses. So Yeah, that's so basically when we are as EMS providers, we are trained to the level of awareness, right? So we kind of understand what's going on. We can recognize what's going to try to kill us. We can secure the scene, and then we can be like, I need these people, right? And this we teach this in EMT class, right? That's your very beginning BSI scene safety. Is the scene safe for me, myself, and my crew? No, it's not. Okay, so I need what? I need additional resources, right? So I need fire. I need the MTA to turn off the third rail. I need PSE&G to turn off the electric to this part of the grid because I have a live wire. Um, I need fire to put out the fire, which um, don't forget you do have a fire extinguisher in your ambulance. And if you really want to ruin the hero's day, put the car fires out before they get there. The most angry firefighters. The fire's out already. Um, then you have like the next level, which is operations, right? So these are the people who are able to operate within that quote unquote warm zone, right? So these are, FDNY was trying to train some of their providers to operate on active shooter scenes to go in with police. Um, so those would be the people who are kind of trained a little higher, right? They're trained at an operational and/or technician level, depending on what spot you're in. So technician would be like, okay, hey, you're going in, you have a flak jacket, you're going to go in with the cops. You're obviously not returning fire, but you're going to be the ones who are dragging, victims at an active shooter event out. Operations, you would be handing those patients off to someone who's working right outside, as opposed to being in the cold zone, right? So you have those three levels. You have the hot, the warm, the cold. The cold zone where there's nothing going on. You're maybe 2 blocks away and you are, prepared to just transport. You aren't going to be hopping into a live scene. Um, there's a lot more training as you move from awareness down to operations and down to technician. Um, Most places don't actively offer you training in these things, but this is training that if you ever felt inspired to, you could go and receive somewhere. So here again, we have our different control zones, which we just talked about briefly. Hot zone. This is where the guys in the really fun alien suits get to go, especially in hazardous conditions. Then you have the warm zone where they start to do decon, right, in this decon chamber, where there's still a possibility of contamination. And then the cold zone, which is where like EMS likes to hang out, or really should be hanging out, because you can't help anyone if you are a victim. As just like in BLS, right, we want to be upwind and down, upwind, upstream, away from wherever that cloud of ooey gooey bad stuff might be blowing. We want to be in the opposite direction. Uphill, always good. So talking about various complicated scenes that you might end up seeing. This, if you go and watch this is actually a pretty interesting accident. So this woman was driving along this bridge. She had her 2 young children in the back. Her one child was in a car seat, and her other child was actually about 6 years old, had a blanket over her head because she was using the iPad and couldn't get the screen contrast right. So she had a blanket over her head. She was driving in the left-hand lane, and a tractor trailer was in the right-hand lane. The tractor trailer lost control, tipped over, more or less rolled over her vehicle, pulling her vehicle onto this awkward ledge, and then the tractor trailer went in between the 2 bridges and burst into flames. It took them hours to extricate her because every time they started trying to get her out of the vehicle, it would start to teeter. So it was very precariously placed. They actually only successfully got her out of the vehicle. She had a broken pelvis, broken femur. Both of her children were like perfectly fine. They had some like glass cuts, and that was about it. If you look here on the right-hand side of your screen, can you guys see my mouse, or do you need me to do the annotate?
We can see it.
You can see it? Okay, because on Zoom you can't see it. So if you look right here, this is actually, there was an army technician or army engineer. They were moving this wild piece of equipment, which was kind of like a forklift on steroids, and he kind of volunteered and he used that to hold the vehicle up while they got extricated her out of the vehicle because she was dangling down on the bottom, like the bottom part right here. So it was hours of operations to get her out, and this just kind of shows you how all the different complications. So now she's got a broken pelvis, as well as I think it was bilateral broken femurs. How much blood can you lose with those kind of injuries?
A lot.
All of it.
Yeah, pretty much all of it. Like your pelvis can hold. So we're going to go into this a little bit more when we start doing trauma and other injuries. But your body has about 6 liters of blood. Your pelvis can hold pretty much all of that, right? So think of your pelvis as this giant goblet of bone. I know, like the Vikings were like, ah, yes, we drank out of the skulls of our enemies. But could you imagine the fish bowls that they could have done if they used the pelvis? So that's a lot of blood. So you're kind of racing against time because she's going into shock. The fact that this woman actually survived this is incredible. Beyond the fact that she was dangling for hours and they were unable to really reach her, the fact that she was in a shock, probably a shock state, and didn't suffer like long-term effects is impressive. So there's an interesting case study in operations and how you can access or not access a patient. My mailman's here. My dog is alerting me to that. So other rescues that we have, water rescues. So cold water. Well, I'll back up a little bit. So 35-degree water Fahrenheit. You will be dead in about 15 to 20 minutes if you're immersed in that. Even in water that is approximately the same temperature as you still lose a lot of your body temperature because of that convection, right? So like we talk about this and we talk about environmental emergencies way later in the course, but basically what happens is as your body is in this water, the water comes past you, the cold water takes your heat away, right? Because of diffusion. If you're hot in one spot and cold in another, the temperatures want to match. So they try to kind of balance that. Unfortunately for you as a human being, you like to be at about 98 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius. So in a chilly water, you're not going to do great. What they recommend that if you are in cold water, the heat escape lessening position is, aka the fetal position, will help reduce the amount of heat that is being lost. Your body also has this really cool thing that helps you survive in cold water. And I'm sure if you can probably Google a lot of these videos, but it's the mammalian diving reflex. It's really very, very potent in small children, which is why small children tend to survive longer immersions than adults do. But basically, if you immerse your face in cold water, your heart rate and your metabolic needs actually start to decrease significantly. You can, as I said, there's a couple really good YouTube videos of people putting their face in ice water while on a cardiac monitor, and you just watch the heart rate just go, and they go right down to a bradycardic rhythm. Which is why we always make sure that when we work up a patient that they are warm and dead, because if you are cold and dead and you aren't in like obvious rigor, there's a possibility that you can save the individual, especially if, as I said, if they're a younger child. There was a 19-month-old, if you've seen this case study, 19-month-old was in the pool for about 30 minutes in, I think, Arizona. Patient was cold and stiff. When they started doing CPR and warming the child actually made a full recovery and had no neurological deficits, which again is impressive. I think they've thawed out some adults after a few hours with a little bit of neurodeficit, but young children have a better outcome. So always make sure they're warm and dead. Agricultural rescue. Farming is dangerous. So there are a lot of really heavy machinery in agriculture. Um, they have the balers. They have things that can mangle your feet or hands if you get too close. And then you have really big animals. So I worked in Melville for a few years, and they have horse, like a lot of bridle paths and horse farms and like horse stuff. Um, if a horse doesn't like you and doesn't like you on its back, it will just throw you um, with kind of no remorse. It's a 2-ton animal. It doesn't really care about you and your 150 pounds. I saw one girl, she was riding a horse. The horse got spooked, kind of threw her, and then when it came down, it actually landed mid-femur, and she had a horseshoe imprint on her thigh, right where her femur was now cracked. And of course, it's not like she was somewhere close. She was in the trails, so we had to gator her out. That was a very painful experience for her, even with pain meds on board. And then we got to the hospital, and they were like, "Why do you think it's broken?" I was like, "Because a horse landed on it, and it was deformed." And they went, "Where?" I went, "At the horseshoe." And they took the traction splint off, which BT dubs, every once in a while, brush up on your traction splint. And her leg immediately went back into muscle spasms, and they were like, "Oh yeah, it's broken." So just remember, the hospital will sometimes do some pretty nonsensical things and reverse things that you have done to fix and help the patient. We're not going to do this assignment right now, but we're going to talk about these collectively. So we have a few options when it comes to pain management. Morphine has been in protocol for a very long time. However, it's kind of getting bumped out of popularity because of fentanyl, because fentanyl has a lot fewer hemodynamic impacts than morphine does. Morphine will tank a blood pressure potentially, which is really the biggest issue. Fentanyl doesn't have that same impact on blood pressure. Morphine, though, tends to be better for like musculoskeletal issues. So sometimes you really have to kind of determine what's going to be better for your patient. If you have a patient who's experienced pain such as kidney stones, narcotics aren't going to do anything. The best thing that you can do for that patient is give them Toradol or Ketorolac, right here, which is a NSAID, which NSAIDs will reduce inflammation, which is really going to be helpful when you are trying to pass a few millimeter-sized stone through a very tiny tube. Nitrous oxide is in protocol in some locations. We had it back, I want to say, the Suffolk Valley system still had nitrous oxide back about 15 years ago. It's really great for pregnant patients. So if they're experiencing pain, you give them the mask, they put the mask on, the pain goes away. But the thing is, you cannot overdose on nitrous because as they're holding the mask, when they start getting a little loopy, they drop the mask and start breathing regular oxygen again, and they come back around. So it's kind of a self-limiting medication. Another one that's really becoming popular, and we're going to talk all of these more in pharmacology. Another one that's becoming popular is ketamine. Excuse me. Ketamine is it's a dissociative drug, so it can cause significant hallucinations, especially when the patient's coming back down. It was very popular in the UK in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. It still is, it's called Special K, because it would cause hallucinations and total dissociation. Like you would just leave your body, out of body experiences. Actually helps boost blood pressure. It also has mild bronchodilatory effects. So if you have a patient who you're trying to sedate, that you're going to consider intubating, ketamine is potentially very useful because it actually will cause, like for asthmatics and stuff, it will cause a little bronchodilation. Pretty nifty. Morphine is IV. Fentanyl is IV, IM. Ketamine is IV. Toradol is IV, IM. And then you have tranexamic acid, or TXA. This is huge, huge, huge in the UK, especially in shock patients. Tranexamic acid pretty much shuts down your plasminogen cascade. I don't anticipate you guys to know this right now because this is like we're not here yet, but it's just really cool how it works. So as your body's starting to clot, your body also starts to break down the clots. The tranexamic acid basically prevents your body from breaking down the clots. So if you have a patient who's hemorrhaging, it preserves the clots so that they can get to an OR in one piece without losing a lot of blood. Pretty nifty drug. The UK uses it. It's extremely inexpensive. It's and it saves a lot of lives. Just things to think about. I think we're done already with this. Hold on. Yep. There's your vehicle extrications. So I'm not a truster of horses. I've seen too many people get beat up by horses. Sounds like a ridiculous thing to be afraid of, but I like to keep them far away. Any questions, thoughts, concerns, recipes before we move on? I'm just gonna.
With that 18-year-old month child and being submerged in water for 30 minutes, is that like, we all know it's factual that it was 30 minutes underwater?
It was at least. The child had not been seen for 30 minutes. So it was actually it was a news article that the parents had last seen the kid for like 30 minutes prior. Was cold and stiff. And again, this is Arizona. I believe it's Arizona in January, so it's not cold, but it's still briskish. But there have been other documented. That was a relatively recent child. That was, I want to say, probably 2 or 3 years ago. But there's been documentation of children, very young infant-sized children, who have survived for hours of after submersion.
And to add, if you look at the obvious death protocol, they want you to work anything that was submerged in water for under an hour. Mm-hmm. So up to an hour's in protocol that they want you to work.
Yeah. And it gets tough.
And that's because the body Brady's down.
Yes. So, and this is also going back to protocol a little bit. So if you have a patient who you found outside, or as we're calling them these days now, professional outdoorsman. If you have a professional outdoorsman who you found on a winter's day who is very, very cold, you still need to go bring that person to the hospital and warm them up. They need to have a core body temperature of, I believe, 95 before they can pronounce them. So I had a lady once, she had not been feeling well. Like, we got the story from like the neighbors. She hadn't been feeling well. I was working, I think, Willie. We either Willie or Victor. So we got there like super early in the morning. She hadn't been seen in a while. She's 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the car. Like, she had been trying to get into the car to go to the doctor. Ice cold and cardiac arrest. And it took them over an hour to warm her to a point where they could pronounce her in the ER. So, it's one of those things like you really need to make sure that you are aware of kind of what you need to be doing.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, several years ago, there was an issue where they pronounced somebody in the field, and when they got to the morgue,
they woke up.
Several hours later, they ended up coming back because they warmed up and they ended up having a pulse. It was very faint.
Yeah, that's why we say when you're doing, especially on a cold body, you actually do hold or do check for a pulse for much longer than you would if they're kind of normal temperatured. That's not a word. I'm sorry, I'm making up words now. But good questions. Any other questions before we continue? No? Cool.
Okay.
What's up?
So you know my background, so I'm still very interested in that case. Is it because the child was just so underdeveloped and that they probably internally everything is closer to like the freezing point that it was able to survive that long? Like other kids at a later stage in life, where they're more fully developed with the epiphyseal plate and so forth like that,
Mm-hmm. I
would
think it's
they
more
would
that
definitely have died?
not necessarily like 100%. I think so. You know how frogs freeze in the winter?
Yeah, that's what I'm
It's
going on.
sort of similar. So basically, they get so chilly that their metabolic and oxygen demands are reduced to almost zero, which is protective because, and this is again, we were doing a few years ago. They were trying to do cold fluids for like neuroprotective cold fluids for cardiac arrests. Um, which is great because like yeah that works really well for patients in cardiac arrest in the hospital when you can kind of really control their body temperature. Pumping them full of cold fluids really just created a lot of like pleural effusions and stuff, which was messy. Let's go with messy. But yes, so basically you're taking that patient's the metabolic need and the oxygen demand and bringing it down to like almost nothing, and that's why they're surviving. Any other questions? Sorry, I'm trying to multitask and get the whatchamacallit, the attendance at the same time. All right, cool. Next lecture. So let's do. I don't like that one. Oh, I guess we'll do incident management. I have mixed feelings about incident management. So, little background. I've done the majority of my EMS career in the city. And I full-heartedly dislike the way that they do fire scenes. Um, they kind of just, all right, put this bunker gear on, and then stand immediately in front of a fire, and you're like, this is a terrible plan. I have no egress, and I'm going to get hurt. So you're standing there dressed like a pretzel nugget, and you have like just random people walking by in their bathrobes and chanclas and just, can I go back in the house? It's on fire. No, you can't. Like, it's the, to me the scene control is poor. But neither here nor there.
Well,
So
they are
this,
getting a little bit better with it now.
are they?
A little bit. Since they initiated having 3 bosses on scene, one for triage, one for incident command, and one for staging, they've gotten a little bit better.
I'm still going to do the suspicious squinty eyes.
Nicole, I will introduce you to my husband's new company one of these days. He's now
Uh-huh.
building command boards for fire scenes and EMS scenes,
Ooh,
and they're pretty freaking cool. So one day when we have time, I'll show them to you.
awesome. Sounds good. So this scene should be relatively familiar, unfortunately. This is from 9/11, this picture. And I think 9/11 was one of those driving forces that really kind of instituted NIMS and ICS to be a requirement for EMS and fire systems. So there was a lot of disorganization at the 9/11 scene because all the communications were down. People were kind of freelancing and trying to get in there because obviously everyone wanted to help.
I'll put it down. Come out.
So they kind of devised a national incident management system to help improve how efficient incidents were run, no matter how complex they were, no matter how many people you have on scene. It gave a structure, right? So it's that you're kind of want to do things in a certain order. You want to have certain branches, if necessary. For like, for example, like, okay, do I need a triage system? No, there's no patients. Okay.
Stupid.
But the whole idea behind it is that it's flexible, it's standardized, and it allows for interoperability. That's a test question that pops up all of the time. So your major components of the NIM system, right? So you have the 3 different levels: strategic, tactical, and support. And then everything kind of moving across from there, where you are in the beginning, you're making sure that you're prepared, right? That we have established what our course of action would be for different types of events, right? So, and you see this a lot when you are putting on an event, right? A large event. So if they're doing something at Randall's Island, right? They will have a preparedness plan. They're going to say, okay, if this happens, then we're going to do this. What's our resource management? Do we need to call in extra units? Do we need to have a standby unit? And then you have the tactical level, right? The command and management. So this is who's in charge of the scene, what's the hierarchy, and then the city, right? So whoever is the first on scene of an MCI is the one who initiates the command until a higher authority arrives. And then like it moves on from there. Because communications information management, right? So everyone has the public affairs person, right? They're the one who controls the information that goes out to the public, because sometimes like there's not all of the information needs to be released at a certain time. That's very much when it comes to like police operations, right? So like they may or may not want to release information regarding a perp right away, depending on what information they have. So then it spans out from there. So we kind of hang out here in the logistics section. We're the medical unit. Obviously, they put us with the food unit. That was well planned, because we will hang out at the food snack tent, EMS. So there's the different sections that we have, right? So you don't necessarily need every single section for every single kind of incident. For example, if it's a very short operation, you don't necessarily need a finance or administration sentence or section, right? Because you're not necessarily going to be procuring anything. But in a bigger scheme, so like with the COVID pandemic, if you kind of think about it, this is sort of what every hospital was doing in order to try to get vents, right? The finance section, they were getting vents, they were getting PPE. Then you had the hospitals that were trying to situations, right? They were trying to figure out how many beds do we need? How can we open up another floor for a COVID unit? Then we had us here hanging out, finding all the patients in home, bringing them in, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Within the EMS branch and or medical unit, we have the triage unit, the treatment unit, the transport unit, and the staging unit. So obviously, again, it's going to be dependent upon what kind of scene you have, like what units you're going to need. So if you have something that has a significant damage or significant number of patients, you're going to need a staging unit where you're putting the ambulances. You're going to need a triage unit, right, to set up where the green tags, red tags, yellow tags are going to be. You're going to have people in those triage areas rendering treatment. And then you're going to have the people who are transporting, okay? And those transport units will report into the staging unit and, ad infinitum. So we use, and when it comes to triage, we tend to use the START triage system in this area of the world. So you have multiple levels of triage. So the very first one is obviously primary triage. So this is when you arrive on a scene and you assess how many patients there are. So for example, you arrive on the scene of, there was the active shooter in Hempstead the other day. Right? So they had 2 individuals who were shot. In the field, they did the primary triage. So they had one black tag, and one red tag. Okay. And then if there had been more individuals, right, all the other patients or people who were on scene were the green tags. If they had been kind of put into a green area to assess for any further injuries, then they would have been re-triaged again in the secondary triage area. So those patients would be, again, they'd be reassessed. So if you're in the triage area and you have a green tag who's all of a sudden complaining of chest pain, they're going to be re-triaged as a yellow or red tag, depending on what's going on. The city is unique. In New York City, they utilize the orange tag, which is a medical emergency on the scene of an MCI that is unrelated to the MCI. So if you are, for example, if you are that patient who you were on a scene of an active shooter, you get to triage system, you're completely, you're in a green tag, you're completely unharmed, but all of a sudden you start having chest pain because you have an underlying cardiac disease, you become an orange tag and they send you to the hospital. Pediatrics, the pediatric start triage is a little bit different because we give kids a little bit of a better chance than we do adults when it comes to labeling them as a red versus black tag. So we actually will give a child 5 rescue breaths within the breathing section of the triage, because remember, kids, and we're going to review this later again, kids are respiratory driven. That's the number one cause of pediatric cardiac arrests, is that they become hypoxic or they are choking or there's some sort of issue with breathing. Kids usually have a bright and shiny new heart that doesn't have too many issues. Obviously, you're going to have kids who do have cardiac issues, but for the most part, they're relatively healthy. So we will give them 5 rescue breaths to try to jumpstart them on the scene of an MCI before we mark them a black tag. So this is one of those things that's a little important to me. PTSD. So PTSD is wildly relevant, unfortunately, in the EMS profession. It's one of those things that is sort of just assumed that it's a high-risk occupation. You are going to be regularly exposed to traumatic incidents. It is inherent in the job. The problem is that there's not a lot of support for people who have some sort of issue, right? So if you happen to be developing PTSD symptoms, a lot of times we don't acknowledge that. We don't say, hey, I need some time off. I can't be on the truck right now. I need a break. And those people who do often feel like they're going to be somehow punished for taking a break, because we treat mental health, especially in this country, we treat mental health as this really stigmatized item, which it shouldn't be. It should be treated just like every other medical issue. And you see that systematically. We are unfortunately really rude to EDPs. We should be better when it comes to...
I promise, no one can see you, man.
Alexis, I can hear you.
Sorry.
It's okay. So we don't do a good enough job. We don't teach people how to be resilient. And unfortunately, the critical incident stress debriefing that we do in EMS it's ineffective. And it's been proven to be ineffective since the 1970s. But we still use it. It actually has been found to increase the rate of PTSD rather than mitigate it, unfortunately. We also don't have really good numbers on the number of EMS professionals who develop PTSD, because no one wants to talk about it. So we can't fix something if we don't acknowledge it, because you go, wow, well, no one's got it. PTSD, it's made up. It's not real. But it really is. It's there. And it could affect a lot of people differently. And some people will be good for a really long time and then all of a sudden just start having symptoms. PTSD also contributes a lot to burnout. There's a lot of burnout in this profession because we don't do a good enough job of taking care of ourselves. So social support is one of the most important aspects of reducing PTSD and PTSD development. People who have really good social support systems, social support networks, actually report a much lower rate of PTSD than those who feel isolated. A little bit more on this, because as I said, this is kind of my area of passion. EMS is a huge suck it up culture, right? How many times have you been like, you know, I don't think I can do this. Like this job or this job type is kind of tough, right? I know people who have kids sometimes have a really hard time on a really serious pediatric arrest or pediatric trauma call because they think of their own children. But instead of being like, hey, that's fine, you know, you want to drive for this job, I'll tack. No, I was like, suck it up. Like if you can't do this, how are you going to do this job? And that's not a great mentality, unfortunately, for reducing PTSD. PTSD is also very insidious. Like it will sneak up on you. A lot of people don't realize like that it's becoming an issue. It actually does change the way that your brain functions, which is pretty wild. It actually reduces the size of your hippocampus. So people who have a larger hippocampus size in general actually are a little more protected from PTSD, which I don't know how you're going to go check unless you want to go get a really good MRI. Be like, can you measure my hippocampus for me? But it's also having the access to mental health services that we don't necessarily have in a lot of places. I know a lot of people have varying feelings on Obamacare, but Obamacare tried to change the way that we view mental health. It was trying to change mental health to being just another like physical ailment. Like you wouldn't necessarily rag on someone for having broken their arm, but we're going to rag on someone for having depression, and that's not okay. So just a lot of things to think about. Also be aware of some of the signs and symptoms that are associated with PTSD. Hypervigilance is one of like the main ones, where you're constantly in that fight or flight situation, which is actually what starts to cause brain changes. Increased anxiety, social isolation, all of those things. We're not going to do this. There is a quiz if you want to kind of see if you are in the range of potentially having a PTSD issue. So that's something you can do on your own if you want. Moving on. I think that's the end of this lecture. Nope, it's not. There we go. There we go. A few other resources, just in the event of if you guys are feeling like you're having a hard time, because paramedic school is not easy. Paramedic school is going to be one of those times where you're exhausted and you're drained and you're doing way more than you think that you should be doing at one time. And that's unfortunately just the way it is. But and this is something I always tell everyone at the beginning of class, so I'm going to reiterate it, and I did it during orientation. Find something that you like that is not EMS. Have another hobby. Do exercise. 20 minutes a day, even if it's just walking around the block. It helps decompress. Exercise is extremely neuroprotective. Beyond it actually helping reduce signs of anxiety and other associated issues, PTSD issues, it also is protective in terms of Alzheimer's. They've found that patients who do a 2-mile walk every day, doesn't even have to be fast, actually have a significantly reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's. Even Alzheimer's patients who walk for 2 miles a day have reduced symptom progression. So just a couple things to think about. Having something other in your life, other than EMS, something that is not stressful. So there we go. All right, cool. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
I love that quote.
It's a great quote.
From, is it Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, Mr. Rogers. Always look for the helpers, right? And that's one of those, it's actually one of those things that's really kind of wild, that you really kind of notice after a while, like who are the people always going to the issues, and those are the people who ultimately need the most help at the end of the day. It sounds silly, but you know, you can only do it for so long without reaching out for help. Constantly exposing yourself to stuff that's tough. It's tough to deal with. Most people don't have to deal with even a fraction of what we see in EMS. So I don't know who this is. All right, take a half a second break because I have to figure out who's calling me. Hello? Speaking. Yes. I have a appointment for this afternoon at 1 o'clock. Yes, I got the email from them this morning to confirm. Yes, I do. Yes. This is the second call I've received about this, actually. They called me on Friday regarding this. They asking if I had sent this stuff out, and I told them that I don't even know who I spoke to. But I explained to them that we had a death in the family. We had to reschedule it to this morning or this afternoon, and that we had received the second package, and that I had received the email confirmation with the new Zoom link. I don't know what to tell you. I have all the email correspondence that's changed it for today at 1 o'clock. Yes, I do. I received the FedEx package in the mail the other day, on Friday, Thursday or Friday. I don't. Hold on. I have to find out.
It's too quiet. How is everyone's rotation so far?
Start next week.
My first call was an arrest.
Had my
Fucking bright and early.
I did a 16-hour tour and had 4 jobs, so.
that's not fun.
So I was at Doorbringer because I did that the tour the day before.
Do they have automated CPR devices on the BLS trucks in the city?
They're only in lieutenant's cars in the city. They're not carrying that shit in. You're on your own. You have firefighters for that.
Got firefighters.
We get cops.
Hey, I had
I had
couple
cops doing
push-
CPR last night, so
Remember,
I need
don't look
to
at your
lock the
back
facility.
with your firefighters.
see around here we lift with our cops. That's our motto.
Speaking of firefighters, on my first cardiac arrest, I like witnessed them using that special device for the right depth, but they were all doing CPR wrong, like the positioning and like how they were doing it. Like I never thought I expected to see that.
Mm.
That's why they're firefighters.
A lot of people do CPR wrong. It's surprising.
How about outside EMS? What do you guys do when you're not saving the world? Anybody surf?
Honestly, I just work more.
Nobody
I go
surf.
hiking a lot. That's about it. It's kind of my thing.
I play music,
Oh yeah,
guitar and
but
bass.
I've been playing the guitar for like 20 years.
Yeah, I got 10.
Do you
Yeah,
play
so that's
anywhere, or do you just play at home?
Me or him?
Both of you. Are you like in a band, or are you just
I
like?
mean, when I was like a teenager, I was in a band and stuff and did like that battle of the band stuff.
I
But
play
now
at my I play at my church's jazz band. So
Cool.
that's cool. Yeah, none of you guys surf, huh? Surf was sick yesterday. Today too is gonna be nice.
It's a little chilly.
I skydive.
Wetsuit.
Skydiving?
I'm gonna set it up.
You jump out of a perfectly
I
perfect
love
good airplane.
skydiving.
Now
If
we're
you
talking.
haven't been, you have to go. It changes your life, I swear.
Now we're talking.
Nicole, if the class
Like,
average is 95 at the end, you have to go skydiving with us.
You know, I'm not skydiving.
Saying, I'll
I'm
do that.
good.
If you guys want, I'll set up a group surf session too. For
I will go
everybody.
surfing. I will 100% go surfing. I have a wetsuit and
If you're
everything.
willing to teach me how to surf, I will go surfing. I have no
Oh,
idea.
that's true.
Yeah, I'll go
I used
surfing
to-
too.
So I used to own a gym, and every summer I used to take everybody from the gym.
If
And,
anyone wants to learn how to jump, I've jumped over 100 times. I could help.
there you go.
I like
Well,
staying inside
let's
a place.
do it. Group skydiving, group surf session. I'll set up the surf.
There we go.
Skydiving. I'm down.
We'll skydive to the beach and then go surfing.
That sounds pretty sick. Everything would have to line up pretty nice for that.
So there's actually a race. So I do a lot of running, and there's actually an ultra marathon where you start by skydiving. So you skydive to the
That's
starting
sick.
line, and then you run like 100 miles.
Oh my gosh.
That's got to be a good
Yeah, I'm
adrenaline.
going just for the
100
skydiving part. I can't
miles?
run for shit, but I'm in.
Just pull a Vin Diesel and skydive with the surfboard attached.
I can't really swim like that, but I'm down to surf.
I'm going to Lido today. As soon as this is over.
Alyssa brought her cat. Everybody look at Alyssa. Hi, cat. My dog's barking at the door right now.
My cat looks like a cat.
He's a hairless cat.
No, never mind. In the small picture, it looked like a cat. Now, and my cat was nothing like your cat. Never mind.
Your cat is Anthony.
Oh, goodness. All right, guys, we have one more lecture. Sorry about that little pause. My bank is doing some stupid crap that... long story. COVID has really made life a challenge when you're trying to do anything banking related. So, all right, last one.
Is just everyone mute though? I think someone had their mic on the whole time before.
It was me. Secrets, it was me. All right, transport operations. The wheels on the bus do in fact still go round and round. 2005. This was out in Peconic Bay, Riverhead. This was a huge.
Yeah, that's my job.
Yep, this is a huge one. A paramedic and an EMT were killed when their ambulance slammed into a tree. A driver attempted to pass a dump truck, lost control, and then they. This is why we don't pass on the right. So you just have to kind of be careful. And if anyone remembers this one, 2016, they were transporting a double transplant patient, and the end of the patient, the driver, they believe had a medical emergency, and he slammed full speed into the barrier in the southern state. He ended up passing away, and the patient also died. 2015, EMT fell asleep behind the wheel and middle of the day, struck a utility pole. The patient ended up passing away. Combinations of things here when it comes to the patients being injured is we don't necessarily secure the patients properly, right? The 5-point harness to go over the patient's shoulders keeps them on the stretcher, because a lot of times when that truck stops, the patient goes right off the top of the stretcher if they're not secured properly. Another thing is EMS is not particularly good about making sure that people get enough sleep. 24s and double shifts, and if you actually look, we don't necessarily abide by the DOT rules. So the cross-country truckers can only drive for 8 hours before they have to take a break. We do not enforce those same rules with ambulance driving, which is pretty deadly, obviously. This one, FDNY ambulance burst into flames. Issues with this is, what's the mechanical status of your ambulance, right? I work at Jamaica. There are trucks that are there that predate me, and I've been there for 7 years. Then there's some of these trucks are still, bless those diesel mechanics, they somehow get those trucks to survive. But what's one of the major problems with an ambulance being on fire?
Oxygen tanks.
Oxygen
Tanks, right? So oxygen, while not explosive, will certainly fuel this fire and make it worse. So, you know, if you smell smoke, it might be you. Always check. It's like when you're driving down the highway and you see a tire going past, you're going, that sucks, and that's your tire. 2011, an EMT was ejected, and the patient suffered critical injuries, multiple rib fractures on the right side, right down the right side. Driver was perfectly fine. The EMT was sitting right here. This truck was stopped at a red light, and a driver crossed the median and slammed right into the B post. There's an 18-inch intrusion, as you can see. EMT was taking a blood pressure at the time, went forward, hit her head, went backwards, hit her head, and then flew out this back window onto Nichols Road. That was me.
I recognize this one.
That was me.
Why are all of these Hunter ambulances?
That wasn't. That was a senior care. There was an EA, I believe EAS and a Fidney. We're mixing and matching.
It was every other ambulance was Hunter.
No, Hunter and senior care have the same colors.
Mm-hmm.
You know if the EMT ended up dying?
The EMT was me. So no. This was my accident. This is my 10-year reunion, 10-year anniversary.
Roll back. Roll back.
I'm so sorry. What?
Yep, this was me.
No.
I was 13 weeks out of EMT school. So I was like, we're going to take a blood pressure, right? Patient was out of a nursing home, and he was having active hallucinations. Honestly, it was secondary to his medication. He was on carbidopa-levodopa for Parkinson's. So carbidopa-levodopa actually has a side effect of causing hallucinations in patients, which is pretty wild, because it's like we're fixing you, but kind of also making you have other issues. So we were at South Coleman and Nichols Road. On Nichols Road, stopped at a red light, and a Ford Explorer, the middle one. I literally can never remember the name of it. Expedition, a Ford Expedition. It was raining out. It was a nor'easter that day. He crossed the grass median at a high rate of speed and hit right there. And I had literally just unbuckled my seatbelt to take a blood pressure, and I went forward, I went backwards, and then I lost consciousness. And I apparently went out this back window because the doors had never opened. I woke up on Nichols Road with my partner securing my C-spine, and my legs all twisted. And I was like, oh shit, this isn't good. So I kind of moved my legs. I'm like, all right, cool, I'm not paralyzed. And then this is going to be a long story. And then my pinky hurt, and I started laughing because my EMTB instructor, Mr. James Gilliland, actually was teaching us in EMT school that the difference between a focused exam and a trauma exam is pinky pain. You do a focused exam on pinky pain. And this is what I'm hearing in my head, my little concussed head. So I'm giggling about my pinky hurting because this is all I could think of. So I lose consciousness again, wake up in the back of the Center Reaches ambulance. And I call my mom because my phone somehow survived this ordeal. I was like, hey, and she's like, hey, what's up? And I thought you were at work. I'm like, I am. We were in a small accident on my way to Stony Brook. I'll let you know more when I find out. And she's like, oh, okay. Hangs up. Calls me back about 3 seconds later. Wait, you were in an accident? I was like, yeah, no big deal. It's okay. So she was taking care of my grandmother at the time who needed regular assistance. So she calls my dad. You have to go to the hospital right now. Nicole is in an accident. I joked my way through triage. I refused morphine because they're trying to get. I was like, I know I have a head injury. Will you try to put me in a coma? Those don't match. You don't do that. That's not good. And they're like, you don't want pain meds? I'm like, not that one. So EMS, we were very, very challenging patients also. Got sent home 2 hours after being sent home. Well, then I started vomiting at home, which was, don't recommend, 10 out of 10, don't recommend. So I go to the bathroom and I see behind my ear is all green. I had battle signs. They call me up 2 hours after they discharged me. You have to come back to the hospital. You have a skull fracture. And I'm like, I know. I've got battle signs. So then they made me go back to the hospital so that I wouldn't sue them. And I was very grumpy for like an entire 24 hours while under observation because they just kept giving me Tylenol and I was in a lot of pain. So every once in a while I still have a little hard time with words. So apologize, me and my TBI over here. But yeah, 10 years, October 29th. Really ruined Halloween for me that year.
Nicole.
Yes.
I'm sorry. You also broke your hip, right? You said, or your pelvis?
I broke my hip 2 years ago, unrelated. I'm just bad at taking.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm just bad at taking care of myself when it comes to being like, hey, you're in pain, you should stop. So I'm gonna blame the dead parts of my brain for that one.
Well, that's what you get for trying to take a blood pressure while working transport.
Right? I know. It's what happens when you're super new and you think you should do the right thing. Those manual BP cuffs, though. So.
Nicole, I'm confused. Wouldn't you have been immediately considered a trauma and they would have rushed you to MRI?
I did. I was immediately a trauma. That doesn't necessarily mean that they did a good job of trauma noting me. They did a head CT. Apparently it was a small, so I had a subdural hematoma and an epidural hematoma, which you're going to learn in a little bit. A subdural hematoma on a head CT looks, it just kind of, it makes like a half crescent moon, okay, because it's a venous bleed. It has some space to go in between the different layers of the brain. An epidural is an arterial bleed, and it kind of looks like on a head CT, it looks like a lemon, because it kind of just balloons out and it doesn't have a lot of space to move. So a subdural bleed is potentially more dangerous than an epidural bleed. Both of them were small. The skull fracture was a basilar skull fracture that they didn't notice right away because, one, they had a resident read it, and two, it was, as per my neurologist, tiny. Infinitesimally tiny. And I was like, but they still missed it. Really, at the end of the day, and it took me 2 weeks to notice, but I can't smell anything. One of the issues with the basilar skull fractures is that cranial nerve 1, again, we'll learn later, is your olfactory nerve. And it comes through your cribriform palate, kind of like this, and goes into your nose. So when you have a basilar skull fracture, it actually it has the potential to sheath the nerve, so then you just don't have a sense of smell anymore. Really great on DOAs, not good when you're trying to do like normal things, like laundry checks. Did I wear this shirt? I don't know. So.
Did you at least get the pressure?
No, I didn't. I might have. I don't know. I might actually have blacked out for that part. But yeah, so the moral of the story is you have to always be really aware of your surroundings. There's nothing my partner could have done to have changed the outcome of this. Like, we were not at fault. But when it comes to, this, hey, I'm kind of tired, right? Don't drive. Can I tell you how many times people, I've seen people go, oh, you know, like, I'm really tired. Like, do you mind if I drive today? No, tech. You have a stable patient in the back. You doze off in the captain's chair. You won't kill yourself. You won't kill yourself, your partner, and your patient, right? No, nothing's potentially going to happen. But you doze off behind the wheel, and you're going to kill somebody, and potentially a lot of people, depending on what happens. So ambulance blind
Wait,
spots. What
I just
happens?
want to further understand this. So, for us, when we have a patient like yourself, you were discharged. Are you saying that like your vitals were completely stable even though you had those bleeds?
Yep. Yep. Totally stable. So the problem with brain bleeds and stuff to that effect is that you could have very stable vital signs up until you really start to present poorly. Cushing's triad, which is what we're going to talk about when we do neuro later, is when you start having the posturing and elevated blood pressure and bradycardia. And irregular respirations. That requires a significant shift of the brain, and even with a significant shift, you can still present relatively normal. It's a very late sign. So if you have a patient who's presenting with Cushing's, they're really messed up. And they've been messed up either for a while or they got messed up really bad, really fast.
Is the battle sign also a late sign?
Yes, because it's a collection of blood. So much like it takes time to develop, sort of like a bruise. Just like raccoon eyes takes a late sign, right? Battle sign is a late sign because it just takes time for the blood to kind of show through the skin. If you have it like right away, that's they've done really messed up, really bad. Any other questions?
I'm just curious, by late sign, usually how long, like how many hours is that on
For
average?
which one?
Just battle signs and raccoon eyes?
Battle sign and raccoon eyes could take about an hour or two to develop. It also depends on how bad it is in terms of so if you could just have some swelling, the bruising part of it might not show up right away. It could be the next day. It's really individualized. If you have somebody who's on blood thinners, it might show up way faster. So ambulances, right? A big old toaster driving down the street. You have a lot of blind spots. Those little fisheye mirrors on the bottom of your mirrors are very helpful for eliminating some of those blind spots. But there's a lot you can miss. So this is why you always have to be very cautious when you drive. You also need to make sure that you physically turn your head, okay? Just using your peripheral vision is not good enough. And we always say use spotters to back up. They have a lot of these ambulances have cameras now, which is very helpful, as long as the camera's actually pointing at what you need it to see and not the curb, because you can take some people out. Other things, if you're making a right-hand turn, bicyclists and pedestrians don't seem to really notice that you may have your blinker on, and you can take somebody out if you don't really turn and look. Things that are obviously essential for knowledge. Type 1 ambulance, you have a truck chassis with a mod body, with a teeny tiny window. This is the majority of your really big Jolly Volley trucks, right? This is also your FDNY trucks, tend to be type 1 ambulances. Type 2 ambulance, aka the vanbulance. And then you have your type 3 ambulance, which is the mod is mounted right onto the van chassis, so you have a larger pass through between the two. So this is your Hunter ambulances, and I can't even tell you that Jamaica has gotten rid of their last 2 type 3 ambulances that they had. A variety of infectious diseases that you may or may not come in contact with. Obviously, we're going to put COVID on that list, just, that's there. C. diff is another delightful experience. That is a possibility that you could that could pop up. Excuse me. Hep B is another one that is very pertinent in the EMS world. Hep B can live up for 2 weeks in dried blood. Influenza, right? We see that every year. Tuberculosis. A lot of places aren't even really testing for TB anymore because it's been for the most part, kind of eliminated. Jamaica Hospital doesn't even do a PPD anymore because they haven't had an active case of tuberculosis in over 3 years. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's still a possibility. Anyone who has been born outside of the United States, for the most part, actually has probably gotten the tuberculosis vaccine. So you will always test positive for TB. Norovirus, right? Back in the days when we were able to do cruises and stuff, that's always popular on cruise ships. The GI, Montezuma's Revenge kind of vibe. MRSA, also Klebsiella, right? A lot of those hospital antibiotic-resistant bacterias pop up here and there. Dengue fever, because clearly we live in the tropics. I should talk about that. So that's just a little activity that we're not going to do right now.
Come on, that's my specialty.
What's that?
I could have given that all to you right there.
Good. It's going to be your homework assignment then. Let me pull up real quick. I have the X-ray, X-ray review sheet for your first exam. So the way your exams work, it looks like it's about every 2 weeks or so. In the beginning, it's going to be on all of the chapters that we've covered previously. So, come on. So basically, this first exam is going to be chapters 52, 53, 54. Okay. Yep. Crime scene awareness, alpha, beta, gamma rays, goals for your decontamination, etc., etc. I will send this out to you guys so that you can start making a review sheet. Because I like to give you guys plenty of time to study. So it will be the lectures from today, the lectures from Wednesday, and those chapters. But I'll send the review sheet out for you guys, and if you have any questions, please bring them to Wednesday's class so that we can go over them, and I will get a little more details, or some more details on all of the other things that are going to potentially be on the test. I actually have to check what day your test is on, unless someone has that readily available.
It's on the 3rd.
On May 3rd? Okay.
The Mod 2 exam is on the 3rd.
Thank you. So May 3rd. So if I'll send this out to once I log off of this, I'll send you the blueprint. And if you would like to do a review later this week, we can do that. But we'll discuss in the group. Okay? Anybody have any other thoughts, questions, concerns before I let you get on with your day?
Could you get us access to the quizzes? If they're not going to be given to us, can they just not be made mandatory and we can just use them as a study?
What quizzes?
The Sanders.
Frank took off all the Sanders quizzes that we used to do. The way we used to do them after each chapter, you had the quiz.
Yeah.
And they had to be due prior to the first day of class.
Yeah.
Frank blocked them all out.
Hold on.